We all know the story, right? A lone castaway, shipwrecked on a deserted island, fighting for survival against all odds. It's this epic tale of human endurance. But what if I told you the real story, the one that inspired the legend, is actually even more unbelievable?
So let's just ask it outright. What if Robinson Crusoe was a real person? Because, well, he was, and his actual experience was so much stranger and honestly so much more profound than the fiction we all know.
You see, his name was Alexander Selkirk. He was a fiery, stubborn sailor from Scotland. And here's the biggest twist right at the start. He wasn't the victim of a shipwreck. It wasn't an accident. He chose to be marooned.
So you've got to be wondering, how on earth does someone make a choice like that? Well, to get it, you really have to get to know the man himself. And Alexander Selkirk's story starts with a serious rebellious streak.
Born back in 1676 in Scotland, Alexander was, well, let's just say he was a handful. People described him as quarrelsome and unruly. He was constantly getting into trouble, even being summoned by the church for fighting with his own family. So what did he do? He did what so many rebellious guys did back then. He ran away to sea. It was the perfect job for him. He became a privateer, which is basically a government-sanctioned pirate, sailing for England.
So in 1703, he joins an expedition on a ship called the Cinque Ports, and it's on this very voyage that we get to that single moment, that one explosive decision that would not only define his entire life, but also spark an immortal legend.
See, as a really experienced sailor, Selkirk became totally convinced that the Cinque Ports was a floating death trap. He thought it was leaky, damaged by worms, and just plain unseaworthy. He kept arguing with his captain, a guy named Thomas Stradling, insisting they stop for repairs. But the captain just refused to listen.
And this all came to a head in October 1704. They'd stopped at this uninhabited island, Mas a Tierra, off the coast of Chile. In a moment of pure anger and stubborn pride, Selkirk basically drew a line in the sand. He declared he'd rather take his chances right there, on that island, than set one more foot on that leaky ship. He was calling his captain's bluff.
And Captain Stradling, who was just as stubborn, called his bluff right back. He had Selkirk put ashore with a musket, some bedding, a bit of rope, and that was it. But the second that boat started pulling away from the shore, this wave of absolute terror hit Selkirk. He begged to be taken back, but Stradling just kept on sailing, leaving him completely and utterly alone.
And here is the craziest part, the ultimate irony of it all. Selkirk was right. The Cinque Ports did eventually sink. The few sailors who survived the wreck were captured by the Spanish and spent years rotting in a brutal prison. That impulsive, hot-headed, seemingly disastrous decision had, against all possible odds, actually saved Selkirk's life.
So now the real story begins. There he is, left with a musket, a knife, a Bible, and this crushing, overwhelming reality of total, absolute solitude.
Just think about that number for a second. 4 years. And 4 months. That's how long Alexander Selkirk was completely alone before he saw another human being. For the first few months, he was just tormented by loneliness, sitting on the beach, scanning the horizon day after day for a ship that never came.
But then something shifted. His survival instinct just took over. He moved inland, and that despair slowly turned into this incredible resourcefulness. He tamed the wild cats on the island to protect him from the giant rats that would chew on his feet while he slept. He built 2 solid huts from pepper trees. When his knife family broke, he forged a whole new blade from some old metal barrel hoops he found. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was adapting. He was becoming master of his domain. He got so fit that when he ran out of gunpowder, he could literally chase down and outrun wild goats on foot.
And it wasn't just nature he had to worry about. The island wasn't always deserted. Spanish ships, the enemy, stopped there twice. And as an English privateer, getting caught by them meant torture and death, for sure. One time, he was spotted. He got to run for his life, scrambling up a tree just moments before they caught him. He held his breath as the sailors stopped right under his hiding spot, before finally giving up and moving on. What a close call.
So, after more than 4 years of living this wild life, the day he had always dreamed of finally arrived. A ship. But his return to civilization, it was not the simple, happy ending you might think. Not at all. A couple of English ships saw a light on the island and sent a crew ashore. What they found absolutely stunned them.
This wild-looking man, dressed from head to toe in goat skins, who could barely speak English anymore because he hadn't used it in so long. The captain, a man named Woody's Rogers, was just amazed by Selkirk, not just by his survival, but by this deep sense of peace he seemed to have. Selkirk rejoined the privateers, and the rest of their voyage was incredibly successful. When he finally got back to England in 1711, his share of the loot was a staggering 800 pounds. Now, to give you some perspective, that is the equivalent of over 150,000 pounds today. He survived the impossible, he came home a celebrity, and now he was rich. But this is where the story takes its most fascinating and kind of tragic turn. He just couldn't fit back in. He found the world to be loud and messy and just empty. He later told someone this incredible thing. He said, "I am now worth 800 pounds, but shall never be as happy as when I was not worth a farthing." Can you believe that? He was never happier than when he had absolutely nothing on that island.
So while Selkirk himself was struggling to find his place in the world, his incredible story was capturing everyone's imagination. It spread like wildfire through London's coffee houses and pubs, and it would eventually inspire one of the most famous novels ever written.
And this is how the writer Daniel Defoe took Selkirk's real story and turned it into the adventure classic Robinson Crusoe. Defoe made some key changes. He changed the reason for being on the island from a stubborn choice to a tragic shipwreck. He stretched Selkirk's 4 years into an epic 28, and, probably most importantly, he gave his hero a companion, Friday, so he wouldn't be truly alone, because the real man, Alexander Selkirk, was totally solitary.
And what happened to the real man in the end? Well, tragically, Alexander Selkirk never found that peace again. He returned to the sea, it was the only life he really knew, and just a few years later, in 1721, he died of yellow fever off the coast of Africa.
In the end, Selkirk managed to survive the ultimate physical test, only to discover that the challenge of returning to society was even harder to overcome. And his story really leaves us with this huge question. What is true survival? Is it about conquering the wild world around us? Or is it really about conquering the world inside ourselves?